The public backlash against Evelyn Harper reached a fever pitch within days. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story, replaying footage of the incident from every angle and dissecting her motives with relentless scrutiny. Social media was ablaze with memes, hashtags, and heated debates about privilege, respect, and accountability. Evelyn Harper stepped off the private jet with a sense of excitement buzzing through her veins. The crisp London air greeted her as she adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses and glanced around at the sprawling cityscape. She had spent months planning this trip, poring over travel blogs and Instagram posts to ensure her visit would be nothing short of extraordinary. For Evelyn, life was all about making an impression, whether it was throwing lavish parties, wearing eye-catching outfits, or doing something outrageous just to stand out. And today, she was ready to create memories that would leave everyone talking. Her suitcase was filled with carefully curated outfits designed to make heads turn. From shimmering gold dresses to bold red trench coats, Evelyn believed fashion was more than clothing. It was a statement. But beneath the glamorous exterior lay a woman who often felt empty inside. No matter how many likes her photos got, or how many people praised her lifestyle, there was always a nagging feeling that something was missing. This trip wasn't just about sightseeing. It was about finding that spark, that moment where everything clicked into place. The first stop on her itinerary, Buckingham Palace. As a history enthusiast, Evelyn had dreamed of seeing the iconic palace up close since she was a child. She imagined herself standing before its grand gates, marveling at its regal architecture, while imagining what life must have been like for kings and queens centuries ago. When she finally arrived, the sight took her breath away. The palace stood tall and majestic, surrounded by lush gardens and bustling with tourists snapping pictures left and right. It was everything she had hoped for, and then some. But what truly caught Evelyn's attention were the royal guards stationed outside the gates. Their crimson uniforms and towering bearskin hats made them look almost otherworldly. They stood perfectly still, their faces expressionless, as if carved from stone. Tourists gathered around them, pointing cameras and whispering in awe. Some even tried playful antics to get a reaction, waving hands or pulling funny faces, but the guards remained unmoved. Evelyn found herself fascinated by their discipline and poise. There was something mesmerizing about their stoic presence amidst the chaos of the crowd. As she wandered closer, her mind began to wander too. What would it take to break their unshakable composure? The thought intrigued her, planting a seed of mischief deep within her thoughts. She dismissed it at first, chalking it up to idle curiosity. After all, Evelyn wasn't reckless, or so she told herself. Yet, as she watched the guards standing motionless under the weight of tradition and duty, a daring idea began to form in her head. What if she could do something unexpected, something no one else dared to try, something that would make her unforgettable? Little did Evelyn know, this fleeting thought would soon spiral into an impulsive decision, one that would change not only her life, but also the lives of those around her. As Evelyn stood among the crowd of tourists, snapping photos and gawking at the royal guards, her mind began to race with possibilities. The idea that had flickered in her thoughts earlier now burned brighter, refusing to be ignored. She glanced around, observing how people interacted with the guards. Some posed for pictures, others whispered jokes, but none dared to cross the invisible line of respect. That's when it hit her. What if she did something bold enough to disrupt the monotony? Something so outrageous that it would cement her place in the memories of everyone present. At first, the notion seemed absurd, even to her. But the more she thought about it, the more appealing it became. Evelyn thrived on attention, and lately, she'd been feeling like her life lacked excitement. Back home, her social media feeds were filled with friends posting about their own adventures. Exotic vacations, daring stunts, and once-in-a-lifetime experiences. She wanted something to rival that, something uniquely hers. And here, standing in front of these stoic figures who seemed almost untouchable, she saw an opportunity. Her eyes drifted to a nearby souvenir shop tucked along the edge of the palace grounds. A bright display caught her attention, a rack of colorful spray paints meant for tourists looking to leave their mark on postcards or small canvases. Without giving herself time to second-guess, Evelyn walked over and picked up a can of electric blue paint. The color was loud, striking, and impossible to ignore, perfect for making a statement. As she paid for it, the cashier raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Evelyn shrugged off the look, convincing herself that this was just another harmless prank. Walking back toward the gates, she felt a strange mix of nerves and exhilaration bubbling inside her. Her heart pounded as she rehearsed the scene in her head. She imagined gasps from the crowd, flashes of cameras capturing the moment, and maybe even a viral video spreading across the internet. In her mind, it wasn't malicious. It was art, a way to inject some spontaneity into the rigid formality of the palace grounds. At least, that's how she justified it to herself. But deep down, there was a tiny voice whispering warnings. It reminded her of the countless documentaries she'd watched about the royal family and their centuries-old traditions. These guards weren't just random people in uniforms. They represented something much bigger than themselves. Still, Evelyn pushed those thoughts aside. She told herself that no real harm would come from it. It was just paint after all. Surely, they could clean it off later. Besides, wasn't breaking rules sometimes necessary to create unforgettable moments? With the spray can clutched tightly in her hand, Evelyn positioned herself near one of the guards. He stood tall and motionless, his face a mask of calm indifference. His nameplate read Whittaker, though Evelyn didn't think much of it at the time. To her, he was simply part of the backdrop, a prop in the grand spectacle she was about to create. She took a few casual selfies, pretending to admire the palace while inching closer to him. The crowd around her laughed and chattered, completely unaware of what she was planning. For a brief moment, doubt crept in again. What if someone stopped her? What if she got into trouble? But then she remembered all the times she'd invite others for taking risks, for living boldly while she played it safe. This was her chance to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. With one last glance around to ensure no one was paying too much attention, Evelyn made up her mind. She was going to go through with it, and nothing was going to stop her now. Months passed, and Evelyn dedicated herself to rebuilding her life, one small step at a time. The court had sentenced her to community service and imposed a hefty fine, both of which she accepted without complaint. But beyond fulfilling her legal obligations, Evelyn made it her mission to create meaningful change. She began volunteering at organizations that supported veterans and military families, working behind the scenes to help those who served their countries. It wasn't glamorous work, folding clothes for care packages, organizing fundraisers, or simply listening to stories from people whose lives had been shaped by sacrifice. But it gave her purpose in a way nothing else ever had. Word of her efforts eventually spread, though Evelyn avoided seeking attention for them. Instead, she let her actions speak for themselves. Friends and family noticed the shift in her demeanor. The once self-centered socialite was now quieter, more reflective, and genuinely invested in helping others. Her social media feeds, once filled with selfies and luxury vacations, transformed into platforms for raising awareness about causes close to her heart. "I'm not perfect," she wrote in one post, "but I'm learning every day how to be better, for myself and for the world around me." Meanwhile, Private James Whittaker continued his duties at Buckingham Palace, earning widespread respect for handling the incident with grace and dignity. Though the memory of that day still lingered, he chose to focus on the positives. His love for serving his country, the camaraderie among his fellow guards, and the knowledge that he had inspired someone to grow. Occasionally, he thought about Evelyn, not with anger, but with cautious optimism. He hoped she would stay true to her promises, just as he hoped he could move forward without letting bitterness take root. Though Evelyn and James never crossed paths again after their meeting in the park, they remained connected through the lessons they had learned from each other. For Evelyn, James's composure and integrity had become a guiding light, reminding her of the importance of humility and accountability. And for James, Evelyn's apology had reaffirmed his belief in second chances, a reminder that even the most reckless mistakes could lead to growth if approached with sincerity. Back home, Evelyn threw herself into new projects, using her wealth and influence to make a difference. She founded a scholarship program for children of military families, ensuring they had access to education and opportunities they might otherwise lack. At first, skeptics questioned her motives, accusing her of trying to buy forgiveness. But over time, her consistent efforts silenced the critics. People began to see that this wasn't about redemption for show. It was about genuine transformation. As for James, he found peace in knowing that his response to adversity had inspired someone to change. His commanding officer praised him for handling the situation with professionalism, and his peers admired his ability to rise above resentment. Life moved on, and so did he, focusing on the future rather than dwelling on the past. In the end, both Evelyn and James emerged stronger from the ordeal. They were forever linked by an experience neither had anticipated, yet one that ultimately shaped them for the better. Evelyn learned the value of empathy, responsibility, and using her privilege for good. James discovered the power of forgiveness and the resilience of the human spirit. Together, albeit indirectly, they proved that even the most difficult moments could lead to growth, if only we're willing to face them head-on. And so, their story became a quiet testament to the possibility of renewal. Mistakes may leave scars, but they also offer lessons, if we're brave enough to learn from them. Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly as she held the can of electric blue paint behind her back. Her heart was racing now, pounding so loudly in her chest that she wondered if the guard could hear it too. She glanced around one last time to ensure no one was watching her too closely. The crowd was distracted. Some were busy taking photos, others chatting animatedly, and a few children were pointing excitedly at the palace gates. Everything seemed normal, almost serene, but Evelyn knew that in just a matter of seconds, all of that would change. Taking a deep breath, she stepped even closer to the guard, close enough that she could see the intricate details of his uniform. The polished buttons, the perfectly pressed fabric, and the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off his bearskin hat. For a split second, she hesitated. There was something undeniably human about him despite his rigid posture and expressionless face. He wasn't a statue or a symbol. He was a person, standing there with quiet dignity. But before she could let that thought take root, she reminded herself why she was doing this. It was supposed to be fun, spontaneous, unforgettable. With a sudden burst of determination, Evelyn raised the spray can and pressed down on the nozzle. A streak of bright blue paint shot out, splattering across the pristine red tunic of Private James Whittaker. Time seemed to freeze for a moment. The paint spread quickly, marring the perfection of his uniform, and Evelyn felt a strange mix of triumph and unease wash over her. She had done it. She had made her mark. But then reality came crashing down. Gasps erupted from the crowd like a wave, followed by shouts of disbelief. People turned to look, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every angle of the scene unfolding before them. Some tourists stepped back instinctively, while others moved closer, eager to see what would happen next. Evelyn stood frozen, still holding the spray can, as the weight of what she had done began to sink in. Private Whittaker didn't move, not at first. His training kept him rooted in place, his expression unchanged even as the paint dripped down his uniform. But when he finally shifted his gaze toward Evelyn, she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach twist. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but a deep sense of disappointment and betrayal. In that moment, he wasn't just a guard anymore. He was someone whose pride and professionalism had been violated in front of hundreds of people. Security personnel stationed nearby sprang into action almost immediately. Two officers rushed toward Evelyn, their voices sharp and commanding as they ordered her to drop the spray can. She complied without thinking, her hands shaking uncontrollably as the can clattered to the ground. Another guard gently guided Private Whitaker away from the scene, his once immaculate uniform now ruined. The crowd parted to let them through, murmuring amongst themselves about what they had just witnessed. As Evelyn was surrounded by security, she felt a surge of panic rising in her throat. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had imagined laughter, maybe even applause, followed by a light-hearted scolding before moving on with her day. Instead, she was met with hostility and judgment. The playful prank she had envisioned had transformed into something far more serious, a public spectacle that left everyone involved feeling unsettled. For the first time since arriving in London, Evelyn wished she could disappear. The cameras continued to flash, capturing her wide-eyed expression and trembling hands. Strangers whispered harsh words under their breath, calling her reckless and disrespectful. As the officers led her away from the palace gates, she couldn't help but glance back at the spot where Private Whitaker had been standing. The image of his stoic face lingered in her mind, haunting her with the realization that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. Days turned into weeks as Evelyn anxiously awaited James Whitaker's response to her letter. She had poured her heart into those words, hoping they would convey the depth of her remorse and her genuine desire to make amends. But as each day passed without a reply, doubt crept in. Had she gone too far? Would he ever forgive her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she refused to give up. Determined to take responsibility for her actions, she decided to reach out again through his commanding officer, this time requesting a face-to-face meeting. To her surprise and relief, James agreed. The meeting was arranged to take place in a quiet park near the palace grounds, away from prying eyes and cameras. On the appointed day, Evelyn arrived early, her stomach churning with nerves. She wore simple clothes, a plain white blouse and jeans, an unspoken acknowledgement that this wasn't about making an impression anymore. This was about humility. James arrived shortly after, dressed casually in a dark jacket and slacks. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They stood awkwardly under the shade of a tree, the sounds of birds chirping and distant footsteps filling the silence between them. Finally, Evelyn broke the tension. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your time." James nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I thought about your letter," he replied, his tone calm but guarded. "It meant something that you reached out. But I won't lie, it's been hard to move past what happened." Evelyn nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand completely," she said. "What I did was wrong, and no apology can undo it. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am and promise that I'll never act so recklessly again." She paused, searching his face for any sign of forgiveness. "You didn't deserve that. No one does." For a long moment, James studied her, as if trying to gauge whether her regret was sincere. Then he sighed and looked away, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I believe you're sorry," he said finally, "but apologies aren't always enough. Trust has to be earned back, and that takes time." Evelyn swallowed hard, nodding vigorously. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. If there's anything specific you'd like me to do, community service, donations, anything, I'll do it. Just tell me how I can make things right." James considered this for a moment before responding. "Honestly, what helps the most is seeing that you're taking responsibility," he admitted. "A lot of people in your position might have tried to brush it off or blame someone else. The fact that you're owning up to your mistake, that means something." His words brought a flicker of hope to Evelyn's heart, though she knew forgiveness wouldn't come easily or quickly. Still, she felt grateful for the chance to speak with him directly, to humanize the man she had once dismissed as just another part of her reckless plan. As they continued talking, James opened up about his journey to becoming a royal guard, the sacrifices he'd made, the challenges he'd faced, and the pride he felt in serving his country. Evelyn listened intently, realizing more than ever how much she had underestimated him. By the end of their conversation, something shifted between them. Not quite friendship, but perhaps the beginnings of understanding. James acknowledged her efforts to apologize and even offered a small smile when she promised to use her privilege to contribute positively to society. Actions speak louder than words, he reminded her gently. Show people who you are now, not who you were then. As they parted ways, Evelyn walked away feeling lighter, though still burdened by the knowledge that healing would take time, for both of them. But for the first time since the incident, she felt hopeful. She had taken the first step toward redemption, and she vowed to keep walking that path, no matter how difficult it might be. The moment Evelyn was led away from the palace gates, her world began to unravel. The cheerful buzz of tourists and the grandeur of Buckingham Palace faded into the background as she was escorted into a small, dimly lit security office. Her heart raced as she sat on a hard plastic chair, clutching her hands together in her lap. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt truly trapped. The confident, carefree woman who had arrived in London just hours earlier now seemed like a distant memory. Two stern-looking officers stood across from her, their expressions unreadable but undeniably intimidating. They asked her questions, basic ones at first, like her name and where she was staying. But soon the tone shifted. Their voices grew sharper, more probing. Do you understand what you've done? One of them asked, his voice heavy with frustration. Evelyn nodded weakly, though she wasn't sure she fully grasped the magnitude of the situation. She had acted impulsively, without thinking about the consequences, and now those consequences were staring her right in the face. Word of the incident spread quickly, both locally and internationally. By the time Evelyn left the security office, handcuffed and humiliated, news outlets had already picked up the story. Headlines blared phrases like, "Tourist defaces royal guard," and "Paint prank sparks outrage." Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from angry rants to mocking memes. Photos of Evelyn holding the spray circulated endlessly, turning her into an overnight sensation, but not the kind she had hoped for. Friends and family back home bombarded her phone with calls and messages, their concern mixed with disbelief. How could someone so privileged and educated make such a reckless decision? Evelyn tried to downplay the situation at first, telling herself it would blow over. After all, it was just paint, right? Surely, people would see it as a harmless prank once the initial shock wore off. But as the days passed, reality set in. Legal experts weighed in on talk shows, explaining that defacing a member of the Royal Guard wasn't just a minor offense. It carried serious penalties. Vandalism, public disorder, disrespecting national symbols. These were charges that could lead to hefty fines or even jail time. Evelyn's lawyer, a high-profile attorney hired by her panicked family, sat her down for a sobering conversation. "This isn't going to be easy," he warned. "You need to prepare yourself for the worst." What hit Evelyn hardest, however, was the emotional toll. She had always craved attention, but this was different. This wasn't admiration or envy. It was ridicule and disdain. Strangers online dissected every detail of her life, criticizing everything from her wealth to her fashion choices. Some accused her of being entitled and selfish, while others labeled her actions as disrespectful to an entire institution. Even worse, she started receiving hateful messages from people she didn't know, each one cutting deeper than the last. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and utterly isolating. But perhaps the most painful part was realizing how much damage she had caused, not just to herself, but to others. Private James Whittaker's name appeared frequently in the news as reporters dug into his background. They highlighted his dedication to service, his pride in wearing the uniform, and the fact that this had been one of his first assignments at the palace. Reading these stories made Evelyn feel sick to her stomach. She hadn't thought about him as a person when she sprayed the paint. He was just a figure in her grand plan to stand out. Now she couldn't stop thinking about him. How embarrassed he must have felt, how betrayed by her actions, and how unfair it was that his moment of honor had been tainted because of her selfishness. As she lay awake at night in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling, Evelyn replayed the scene over and over in her mind. She imagined what it must have been like for James, standing there motionless as the paint ruined his uniform. She pictured the disappointment in his eyes and wondered if he'd ever forgive her. For the first time in her life, Evelyn began to understand the true weight of accountability. Her actions had consequences, not just for her, but for everyone involved. And no matter how sorry she felt, she knew some mistakes couldn't simply be erased. The courtroom was cold and sterile, its silence interrupted only by the occasional shuffle of papers or the sharp click of heels against the tiled floor. Evelyn sat nervously in her chair, her hands clasped tightly together to stop them from trembling. The legal proceedings had begun, and for the first time, she was forced to confront the full scope of what she had done, not just through headlines or social media posts, but through the raw emotions of those who had been affected. Witnesses took the stand one by one, each sharing their perspective on the incident. A palace official described how the defacement of a royal guard's uniform was seen as an insult not just to the individual, but to the institution itself. "These guards represent centuries of tradition," he explained, his voice firm yet tinged with sadness. "What happened that day disrespected everything they stand for." Another witness, a tourist who had been present during the incident, recounted the shock and anger that rippled through the crowd. "It felt like we were witnessing something deeply wrong," she said. "People come from all over the world to see the changing of the guard. It's a symbol of pride and history. To see it treated so carelessly, it broke our hearts." But it was Private James Whittaker's testimony that hit Evelyn the hardest. When he entered the room, dressed in his immaculate uniform, the atmosphere shifted. His presence commanded respect, even from those who didn't know him personally. As he spoke, his words were measured and calm, but they carried a weight that silenced everyone in the room. "I joined the military because I wanted to serve my country," he began, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "Being chosen to guard Buckingham Palace was one of the proudest moments of my life. That day, I was standing there doing my duty when suddenly, everything changed." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The paint didn't just ruin my uniform, it made me feel like my hard work meant nothing, like I wasn't important. And while I understand that mistakes happen, this wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate." Evelyn listened intently, her throat tightening with every word. She could see the pain in his expression, hear the frustration in his voice. It wasn't just about the paint. It was about trust, dignity, and the years of effort he had poured into earning his place among the ranks. For the first time, she fully understood the ripple effect of her actions, how one reckless decision could undermine someone else's entire journey. When it was her turn to speak, Evelyn stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. Her lawyer had prepared her for this moment, advising her to remain composed and sincere. But as she looked around the room, at the judge, the jury, and most importantly, James, she realized no amount of preparation could ease the guilt weighing on her shoulders. "I want to start by saying I am so sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never intended to hurt anyone, especially not Private Whittaker. At the time, I thought it would be funny, something spontaneous that people would laugh about later. But now I see how selfish and thoughtless that was. I've spent these past weeks reflecting on my actions, and I realize I let my desire for attention blind me to the consequences." She glanced at James, who remained stoic but attentive. "Private Whittaker, I can't undo what I did, but I hope you'll believe me when I say I regret it more than anything in my life. You deserve respect for your service, and I failed to give that to you. If there's any way I can make things right, please tell me." Her apology hung in the air, met with silence. The judge thanked her for speaking and moved on to the next phase of the trial, but Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that her words might not be enough. Apologies couldn't erase mistakes, and trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Still, she left the courtroom feeling a small sense of relief. For the first time since the incident, she had faced the truth head-on and admitted her wrongdoing without excuses. Back at her hotel, Evelyn replayed the day's events in her mind. She thought about James's testimony, the witnesses' accounts, and the weight of her own apology. Though the road ahead was uncertain, she resolved to keep moving forward. If nothing else, this experience had taught her the value of accountability and the importance of learning from her mistakes.